Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Syracuse Sports. We've got football that we watched to discuss. We've got football that ACC Network cameras have captured over the past few weeks to discuss. We're going to hear from head coach Fran Brown. We're going to hear from coach Robert Wright, co-defensive coordinator and linebackers coach for the Orange. We're also going to hear from Deion Tank Wilson from that Syracuse defensive line, a new transfer for the Orange. And we're going to hear from our Syracuse Sports Insiders. As always, you guys are welcome to connect with us at any time by texting 315-847-3895. Great to be back in action here. And let us start right there before we get into the meat and potatoes of what we saw at practice and everything to discuss with you. My thanks to Emily for holding down the fort on the pod, on the Syracuse Sports Text Insider line. Chris Carlson hopping in as well. So thank you for that, Emily. Appreciate that. I was in sunny San Diego for a week, a little R&R before we dig in back to the grind of football. And, I almost didn't come back. I almost sent Emily a text and said, it's all you now. I'm not leaving the beach.
I wouldn't have blamed you. I would not have blamed you if you had wanted to stay in San Diego. It's a very lovely place.
So great times there, but great to be back and watching some football today and watching a show about watching football, which we will get into coming up here with a little review of ACC All-Access. This is great. Emily and I text each other all the time about like Star Wars shows and Succession and all the Bear and all these shows that we watch. So we actually get to review a TV show, which is what we want to do all the time anyway. So we're looking forward to that. First though, Emily, what were you watching at practice today? What were you honing in on?
I spent most of my time with the cornerbacks. So over kind of watching Fran coach them up and work with them, mainly just to kind of confirm what we kind of already knew about who the leading four guys are there, but just kind of double down on that. And those guys are Jaden Bellamy, Clarence Lewis, Devin Grant, Marcellus Barnes Jr. I think Jaden Bellamy seems pretty much a lock for one of the starting spots. And then I do think Clarence Lewis and Devin Grant are maybe still vying for that second spot a little bit. I think Clarence Lewis potentially has an edge just because he has played this position before. Devin Grant got switched from safety to cornerback by Fran when he arrived here. So those who are battling it out. But yeah, we saw more of the same from Fran, right? He was very hands-on with these guys.
For sure.
He was teaching Clarence Lewis at one point about like just eye direction and where he needed to be looking on a play. Like he was explaining to him for whatever this exact circumstance was that they were talking through, that like he wanted him to look at not like where the ball was, but how the defenders in front of him, like the linebackers at the defensive line, were reacting to the ball to know, okay, does he need to drop back and cover this gap, cover this person who's coming through, whatever. So that was interesting. He also gave a little bit of love to one of the younger guys in the room, Ibn McDaniels, who had some good play. It was funny. He came up to the line and did his rep first, and Fran was like, relax, you got to relax. Had him do the rep again. And then he was like, you're doing great. Like, you're constantly improving, which is like such a nice affirmation to give a young freshman. I mean, obviously we talk a lot about how sometimes practice gets a little bit feisty in language and stuff like that. And certainly all sorts of words are thrown about, but to hear that, I was like, oh, like that's really nice. And I think obviously, again, like speaks to how much Fran does care about these players and cares about developing them from day one. I mean, like, I don't think we think Ibn McDaniels is probably going to see much playing time, but Fran's still focusing on him and making sure he gets better. And so, that was the cornerbacks where I spent most of my time. I did go in and watch the quarterbacks and running backs just for a couple minutes because I just published a piece about the backup quarterbacks, and I wanted to make sure there wasn't anything switching around in there that might change what the angle of that piece is, and kind of the fact that we think Michael Johnson Jr. has stepped forward in that race. But I spent most of my time with Fran and the cornerbacks.
Yeah, that's an interesting development. Make sure you guys read Emily's story about that, because what Fran said about the backups was, I want them to make this a hard decision for me. And he did reiterate that today when we talked to him after practice. We'll play a couple of clips from Fran coming up here, but it's clear that Michael Johnson Jr. has put some heat on that too. He's fully in line to take it. essentially from Carlos Del Rio Wilson, who's kind of the default backup quarterback, having served there last year, but wide open competition there. You know, Fran, I think it was even complimentary of Jakari Williams a little bit too, which honestly, I appreciate Fran's candor on most things so far, but I think we got a little coach speak on that one. I think he was pumping up his guy. I have a hard time believing a freshman's going to come in and be the backup quarterback for this team as much as it's a fresh set of eyes and it is a true competition for the two. I just think he's at a true disadvantage there, but I appreciate Fran wanting to compliment his guys. Jakari did make some throws out there. I actually focused on the quarterbacks today because bias is showing fully here, Emily. Got to see the tight ends in passing drills, which we don't always see. Sometimes the tight ends are overdoing blocking and they're not mixed in with the wide receivers. I spent a lot of time sending some video to our Syracuse Sports Insiders of the quarterbacks working specifically with the tight ends today. And look, Michael Johnson Jr. is in the mix. You could tell he's a quarterback. He was, I think at one point named a top 10 dual purpose quarterback in the country in recruiting, good enough to go to Penn State. Back at the position full time. You could tell, like, you know, it's riding a bike in a way. Things are coming back to him. And from what I've seen so far, I'd like to see him in true football, actually. We don't get preseason football in college football, but I think he can hold down the job if given the opportunity, and at the very least could be another weapon in that offense. So I focused on that today. And I think this could be the deepest tight end room in the ACC. And if it's not, it's in the top 2 or 3. OG looks solid. I don't think there's any remaining things from that injury that are noticeable. That was something we saw on the ACC All-Access show, which we'll get to coming up here in a minute. Dan Villari in the mix. It was interesting to see David Clement and Jamie Tremble get in there. And man, Fran just keeps poking the bear because when he says Fidel Diggs is getting in the tight end room sometimes, I'm like, oh man, just thinking of the possibilities there, maybe some red zone goal line situations, all of a sudden Fidel Diggs is going to run out there and it's just going to, I can't wait to see that for the first time in some game action. So reaffirmed everything that I thought, but still good to see because we don't always get to see those guys in passing situations. Sometimes it's drill work that we don't get the opportunity to see. While we're on the subject of wide receivers, Emily, we should know Justice Ross Simmons did not practice today. He was on the bike off to the side, helmet, shoulder pads. Fran said it's a hamstring issue, and the good news there is he will be back at practice on Tuesday, according to Fran Brown, so they were just being precautionary with some things. Fran even said he's had some bad luck with some injuries, trying to overcome that a little bit, and it appears he's going to be back in the flow here and should be good to go for the start of the season.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any concern there, and certainly Syracuse's wide receiver room is deep enough at this point that if they were to need to rest him for game 1 against Ohio, I don't think that would be too difficult for them to do. They wouldn't lose too much of a step there. Back to the tight ends for a minute and being pass catchers. I mean, that's what you missed from Michael Johnson Sr. last week when we talked to him. He's leading the tight ends now. And he said all of them in that room, everyone, Max Mang, David Clement, everyone in that room is catching passes this year. And so we'll see if that applies to Fidel Diggs too. I think I am more inclined to think he might just come in as a blocker or a special situation guy, but maybe I'll buy you a bottle of champagne, Brent. And if Fidel Diggs gets passed to, then maybe we need to pop a bottle of champagne for the throwing to the tight end agenda.
You don't have to go to the bubbly, just a pumpkin beer. It's that time of year, kids. Don't say it's too early, okay?
It is.
No, it's not. It's not too early for delicious cold beer that happens to be pumpkin beer. It's good any time of the year, but we can have that
October
debate.
1st. October 1st.
Oh, that's way too late. That's way too late.
No.
Look, if you put the beer in the store, I'm going to buy it. Do I think it's in there a little too early? Maybe, but if it's in front of me, I'm not going to walk by it. I'm a sucker, okay? They got me on that one, but we'll have that discussion another time. So good news there. And Emily, there was a scrimmage over the weekend, closed to the media, but we did ask Fran about it afterwards, and here's what he said.
Clint did a good job. Offensive line got better. Yeah, those guys, I'll say that. Kyle, LeQuint, OG made a great catch, and then the offensive line, they did a good job.
And you said offensive line got better. Is that just in scheme? Is it something else? What's something tangible?
I just think
there?
they're playing together. they communicate better. So when you can start to communicate, it allows everybody to do their job, and nobody's hanging each other out to dry. So, they're just communicating better.
There you go, Fran Brown. A lot of offensive focus when we asked him about the scrimmage. Didn't hear a lot of shout outs for the defense. At least that's what was top of mind for the defensive minded coach.
Yeah, and we did ask Robert Wright the same question, and he this is where I think we got a little bit of coach speak on both ends, both from Fran and from Robert Wright, because it's like the first person Fran named was Kyle, and it's like, yeah, I'm sure Kyle did really well in the scrimmage. I would hope that he was doing really well in the scrimmage, but Robert on the defensive side just kind of said the whole defense too. So I don't know if that maybe means that the defense didn't have as good of a scrimmage as they hoped, or maybe just everyone was playing so in sync there that he didn't feel like shouting someone out, but not quite as much insight into the scrimmage as I would have liked, especially being the one asking those questions. But I appreciated Fran's response when I kind of doubled down and was like, okay, well, what were the tangible, what did the O-line improve? And he said they're playing more as a unit. They're talking more, they're communicating better, which makes sense, right? Because now 2 weeks into practice we've seen pretty much the same guys on that first string O-line and even second string O-line. There's been some fluctuation with the second string, but those main 5 guys seem to be the 5 starting guys. And Fran kind of went and said later, no, we're still moving things around. We can't get complacent. There's still competition, but we haven't had variation in that.
No.
5 starting.
And what is interesting there, Emily, is Savion Washington and Demetrius Weatherspoon, otherwise known as Big Spoon, have flipped a little bit. Left tackle and right tackle, which you might have to do. If somebody gets injured, you might have to go to the other side. Of course, Jean-Ray Reed's locked in as the starting center. We've seen Mark Petrie and Jacob Bradford kind of round out the offensive line. That's been pretty consistent with the one so far. A lot of our Syracuse Sports Insiders ask about Enrique Cruz. He's a fan favorite, of course. Shout out to the Syracuse tailgate. He was working with the second team from what we saw today. We'll continue to monitor how that goes in practice, but there's some depth on this offensive line. I think it's notable, though. You got those 2 new guys. When you got Savion Washington and all, what is he? 6'6", 340, right?
6'8".
6'8". I cut him down a couple of inches. Yeah. He's
huge,
massive human being, right? So he earned that spot, and that's a great left tackle for Syracuse, or right tackle, no matter where he's at, though. But you need somebody to protect your asset, and Kyle McCord, and that was a big pickup there. So there you have it with the offensive line and what's going on there, and what Fran said about the scrimmage. While we're playing some sound bites here, I also asked Fran today. We're going to get into our all-access review here shortly, but I asked Fran, having the cameras around, right? Because Fran talks all the time about dart. Detailed specifically. Well, Emily, the camera doesn't lie, right? So how is having all these cameras around all the time helping or hurting this team? And here's what Fran said about
I don't know. The cameras don't make me do that. That's just, my mom did that when I was young. My wife, my daughter, my sons, my family, my name. Syracuse. I'm not doing that for the cameras. That would be I would be a fraud then, Just that's something that was instilled in me being younger. I think my faith does that, and just having the opportunity of working at Syracuse does that. Not like the cameras. I've been around the cameras since I was a kid. I started quarterback as a freshman in high school, so that wasn't an issue. But it's I don't know. It's just me, my faith. The city I'm from, Camden, New Jersey. Gotta make sure that I stand on what I say. So I'm not going to. Camera won't ever change who I am. It's just who I am every day when I get up. I just got to be myself. If I'm anybody else, then I'm a fraud, and I don't want to be a fraud.
Coach Wright had a pretty funny answer, too, when we asked him about the ACC Network cameras. I'm not sure if it's this soundbite here. Here, let me play this real quick.
Everything about it. It's really what I've grown up in, defensive.
Okay, that's something different. That's right on his defense. But Coach Wright said, it's 10 o'clock at night. You're getting a snack. You turn around. There's a camera, right? So they are truly getting all access with this show. And that's the thing. When you're preaching detailed, accountable, relentless, and tough, Fran can't, as much as we talked earlier about how, his voice kind of booms over practice and he has a presence everywhere. You can't be everywhere all the time, but the cameras are, and they're seeing everything. So I think that not only are people like, oh my God, what are they going to show? And what am I going to say when they mic me up? It's like, no, they're just showing you working here and, doing what you need to be doing, what the coaches want you to be doing.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good transition, right, into the episode itself and what we saw. First 30-minute episode, there will be another 2. I believe the next 2 are also on Monday nights at 7 p.m. I believe. Might need to fact check myself on that. But, I mean, certainly a very cinematic episode, right? Like It was very beautifully constructed. And there were some fun moments in there. Thought the shoe burning ceremony was interesting. I thought Arounde talking about picking up marbles with his toes was really interesting, along with the very close-up videos of his feet, which just brave to commit to having your feet on national television.
Yeah, with a big scar there.
Yeah, a gnarly scar. Yeah,
pretty gnarly surgery scar. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but overall, like I didn't feel like there was anything like super revelatory or like big picture that we were like, oh, like we haven't heard about this before. And I hope to you guys that speaks to our coverage of this team and what we've been able to get you access to. Certainly the behind the scenes things are fun, like seeing in the locker room and seeing Justin talk about having to clean out his shoes for whatever reason. And all of that is interesting and is stuff that we don't get to give you. But in terms of the on-field stuff, the stories about Kyle and his decision to come here, all of that's kind of stuff we've talked about before and been talking about. So it's just kind of a different angle.
For sure. I think what these shows are good at and what they did a good job is kind of little details. Like what does Fran say? And who knows if he's playing it up for the cameras. He said in the clip we played that he doesn't. And I believe him there. I think he actually does say these things to these players, but goes up to Kyle. And he's told us this before, but he said, I want Little League Kyle, use your feet, right? Tells LaQuinn Allen, beginning of practice, I need 1,500 yards from you. Can you do that? Who's the toughest person out here? And Fran's kind of joking around, other than me, of course, right? Kind of putting these guys at ease. Little things that Kyle McCord says to the team that we don't always get access to or privy to. The OG thing is interesting to me, Emily, because I've never gone through an injury like this, but I've talked to plenty of players who have. And what they tell you is just the monotony and the day in, day out rehab of doing the same darn thing over and over again, which you have to do to strengthen if it's an ACL or in his case, a foot. And how you mentioned picking up the marbles with his foot and just, it can wear on you. Just the day in, day out boredom of working back to it, what the trainer's telling him to do and jump with your foot this way. And it's like, you're a football player and you're competitive. Man, everything in you has got to be saying, I want to get out there and do more than this, but you have to go at a pace to recover, especially from a serious injury. Liz Frank injuries have ended careers for football players. So the fact that OG has recovered this well from it shows you the work that he put into it. And Emily, I think they did an excellent job of presenting to us something we've heard about for years. Okay. The shoe burning ceremony goes back to Coach McPherson. And I loved that the ACC Network got to showcase Kyle Federley, who Kyle is now with Jim Boeheim. Jim Boeheim technically still works for the university, right? But is now the longest tenured employee in the athletic department. Okay. He has been there for so long. Kyle is a tremendous guy, has story upon story upon story. Of course, you hear him doing the color commentary for lacrosse. So he's also very involved in lacrosse. To give Kyle kind of that spotlight, I loved that. But it was Fran's way of saying, look, we're going to put our own mark on this, but we're going to respect the past here. And you finally got to look at something. I've heard these stories before, right? But now to kind of see that, and like I said, these things are cinematic, they're dramatic a little bit. That was cool. So I think that's what these shows are good at presenting to us. And I think for the most part, they did a good job with that. I do have it on good authority, Emily. That fire does not smell very good. So don't be making s'mores on that thing.
That was my first thought I had. I was like, oh my God, all the rubber that is going into the air. I was like, I was like, you better plug your nose walking around
Yeah.
campus for a few days after that.
Yeah.
Shout out to I don't apologize, I don't have his name, but shout out to the insider who did text about that, knew about it last week, and we just didn't really get a good chance to ask about it last week. But glad we got to see it on film.
Yeah.
I will say the other two things that weren't necessarily like mind-blowing to me, but I did think were interesting tidbits. You kind of referenced it is one, just kind of the little montage they had of Kyle talking to different teammates and like giving them advice and like telling Trevor, like, well, if you turn inside, just think about how much room there is out this way and stuff like that. And just, it really drove home. Like, we keep on hearing how intelligent he is and how he has such a high football IQ. And you think, okay, yeah, most quarterbacks do, you have to, but like, he's out here knowing how to tell his receivers to run their routes and like which way they should turn in coverage. Like, he knows everyone's position on this offense and is able to help them with it. So that was one thing. And then from John Wildhack's brief appearance, when he said that after Virginia Tech was when he kind of really started to think that he was going to have to look for a coach. I don't think that was surprising. We're thinking back to when the Virginia Tech game was, but what it did make me remember, and I went back to see if it had been after that game that I snapped this picture, and it was actually earlier. But I remember it was the Florida State game from looking back at my pictures. We walked out and we had to walk across the field to go get to the press room or whatever and talk to Dino. And obviously the Florida State game was bad. We all remember the Florida State game and how poorly that went. But John was standing there on the field, just kind of looking out over the field. And I snapped a picture of it because I was like, he's thinking about something and he's considering what this means. And so if I recall, I mean, after the Florida State game was the bye, I think, and then the Virginia Tech game, because Florida State was last in that kind of gauntlet of Clemson, UNC, Florida State. And so that was like 2 weeks before he ended up, sounds like, making the decision. So I thought that was interesting as well. Just kind of confirmed, I think, suspicions that we had in season last year.
I don't want to relitigate the whole Dino Babers thing. Trust me, this will come full circle, but there's a couple things that come to mind. Hearing you say that and just revisiting why we're here. And look, if Dino Babers is still the coach here, they're not doing an all-access show with Syracuse football, right? The ACC Network was also there today doing the ACC Network kind of tour. They go to every ACC football school and you got the ACC Network crew there, and that's great. It's all great exposure for football, and it's interesting to kind of get that outside perspective on Syracuse, right? But two things that you brought up there, actually kind of three. You mentioned Florida State. It was leading into that Florida State game, and with Emily as my witness, I said this walking out of that press conference. I knew Dino was done at that press conference. When
I'm trying to think back.
When NIL came up, right? And I didn't even ask him about NIL. I asked him about depth. I was literally like, what's the depth of your team like here about halfway through the season? And he said, we don't have any depth. It all gets bought away, right? And you could just kind of sense like, okay, like something's amiss here. And I walked out of there with Emily as my witness, and I said, I think he's done. I think he's done as the coach. Like, that was my first real moment here. So that made me think of that, to hear a Wild Hat come full circle and say that. But it's what I was saying a moment ago, Emily. Like, it's that new coach energy in what Fran has done to build things up to this point. And we'll see when, they start playing football for real here and the immediate impact that he's making. But it creates a new energy and interest in Syracuse football, and the opportunity for them to have these cameras around and show them what they're doing. And ultimately, these are commercials for these universities, right? And it shows recruits what you're telling them. And look, you don't get a lot of this stuff if Dino's still around. That's just the blunt assessment of that. The other thing that made me think of that, Emily, was our shout out to our guy, Connor Pignatello, who's going to be writing some recruiting stories for us on syracuse.com, both for football and basketball. And he wrote a great piece on Monday. It was about a Rochester commit. And in the midst of that story, you have a coach who's a former wide receiver at Syracuse in Rochester who tells Connor in that story, just talking about some other things, how he never talked to Dino Babers. How does that happen in 8 years that you don't talk to a coach of a major program, Aquinas Institute in Rochester? And it's two things there. It's you're not connecting with the local coaches enough, and you're not connecting with your alums enough. So look, Fran Brown has already done that. He has welcomed back alums to practice, and we've heard from a lot of coaches here locally. Bruce Williams, for example, an alum at CBA, a major, football. They're a power in Central New York, that were saying we never heard from the previous administration. And Emily, this is football 101 stuff. Like, how are you not doing this? And Fran, at the very least, is checking those boxes. Now add in this show and the exposure that it brings the program and what you can show and what you can do and the renewed interest. And look, it's all good. It's all good for football and recruiting and everything that these guys are trying to get accomplished.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. That's like the big takeaway from this, right? Is it's exposure. And it's for all the people that have felt that Syracuse isn't getting enough prestige on the national stage early, feels like there should be more recognition there. Like this is a vehicle for them to hopefully get that, right? They hope, the ACC hopes that it's not just Syracuse fans watching this show. It's ACC fans, it's Ohio State fans curious what Kyle McCord is up to, whether they spite watch it or out of genuine curiosity. It's
ratings are ratings, Emily. They'll take it.
Yeah, I know. It's Georgia fans watching who loved Fran Brown as DB coach. So yeah, I don't know that I wonder if we'll get any like stats for like viewership. I certainly would be intrigued to know like how many people are watching.
Well, the thing is, they'll replay the hell out of this thing. The ACC Network, they
doubled it. They rolled
shows,
it back to back because they started it back again at 7:30.
Right. So you will have plenty of chances to see it. People are asking me if it's going to be on YouTube as well for those that don't get the ACC Network or maybe don't watch it often. So like you'll have chances to see this thing. And as Emily noted, there's a couple more episodes coming here as training camp builds out. So
I will say, Brent, I was disappointed we did not get our star turn at all in this. This felt like the episode. This felt like the episode most primed for a media appearance, and
just one shot.
We weren't even in the background of anything.
I was hoping for you. I was on the ACC Network today. Thank you to Mark Packer and Andrea Adelson for having me on ACCPN this afternoon. It was a tremendous time as always. I'm like, can we give Emily a little shout out here? Just in one of those shots of like Emily writing in her notebook or something dramatic here.
I mean, they sat in on our whole first press conference with Fran. There was like 8 cameras in there, which is way more than we were ever used to.
There was nothing from the presser. Come on, guys, help us out a little bit here. The other thing that was missing from the show, no announcer, no Liev Schreiber, right?
Oh.
Guys, I'm right here. Talk to my agent, who is me. Let's talk, right? Like, that's my favorite part about Hard Knocks is Liev Schreiber and just the Chicago Bears take the practice field. Caleb Williams with his first professional throw. He could read the phone book. Kids, a phone book is a publication that used to come out that listed all the phone numbers in the world before Google. Like, he can read a menu at a restaurant, and I am captivated. So I think what the ACC Network, and it's not too late, guys, you have my number, they need to find just a few breaks in there with that dramatic announcer, voiceover, nice transition kind of thing. Yeah. Just that's the only thing that was missing. So should we give it a grade of sorts? I mean, for what it was, I'll give it a solid B. I'll give you a B. How about that?
Yeah, I'd probably go a B too. Again, like it's I think too, knowing how many hours they've spent there, like Syracuse's spokesman has told us there's been days they've been there until 3 a.m. And I think most of what we saw happened in the daytime, save for that like 5 a.m. clip of Fran heading to the facility. So I want to see the witching hour at Syracuse. Like, what are they doing at 2 a.m. in the facility? Like, is he calling recruits? Is he going over his depth chart? Like, what's going on at 2 a.m.? And again, maybe we'll get that in the next 2 episodes. But yeah, I think a solid B for the opening episode. Certainly, starting with the shoe burning ceremony was a great tone setter and a nice dramatic moment. And then they hit everything you would have expected them to hit, like highlighting McCord, highlighting Arande, highlighting all these New Jersey players that Fran brought in and really getting the New Jersey voices in there. I was kind of surprised Yassine Willis got
Yeah.
His moment as a true
My
freshman.
boy. Let's go. Now, what they need to find is there's always a character in Hard Knocks that's not a mainstream guy or a coach. It's like a trainer or it's just a character at training camp. And I'm going to give you a candidate here who I think
got
they
one
should.
too.
You got one too?
Yeah, you go first though.
I wonder if we have the same person in mind. Okay. They would be smart to mic up Dion Maddox.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, because he has a lot of those very soundbite worthy things. One thing he says at practice a lot is eyes tell lies. Eyes tell, like if you just want somebody that has a bunch of those expressions at the tongue, put a mic on my guy Dion. Who do you have in mind though?
That's a good one. I was going to say just for the like kind of eccentricness that I think he would bring just from what we've seen from him over the past year and the mic'd up segments he's done for Syracuse. I was going to say Jack Stonehouse because he's like,
good one.
They're not going to do too much on the special teams just because they're not. Like, I would be very surprised if we got a special teams feature, but you did see him behind Justin Barron in a clip in the locker room, and he can be a funny guy. So that was mine, but I like Dion. I think Will Hicks would be another one. I kind of wanted to hear from him in this episode, especially seeing him in the weight room with Fran. I mean, obviously he just got back from being at the Hall of Fame ceremonies for Dwight Freeney and played a huge role in his career. So seeing him there with Fran in the weight room as they were covering his morning workout, I was like, give me a Will Hicks audio quote.
That's a great choice, especially in like the weight room stuff, the things people don't always get to see. Like you said, maybe clips here and there on like syracuse.com and things of that nature. But I'm sure they have discovered, and all the time they have spent at the facility, a few of those kind of names you might know or faces you might know, but when you put a mic on them, they're going to turn into the stars of the show. I can't remember the name of the coach. Oh, I think it was Bob Wiley. I want to double check myself here, but I don't know if you recall Bob Wiley when he was with the Cleveland Browns and they did it was Bob Wiley, who just turned into a breakout star of Hard Knocks when he was with the Cleveland Browns, and some of the clips and the stories that he told about he's walking around the field and he's like talking about how, like, do you think when they stormed the beach at Normandy, they were stretching beforehand, and just like old school football coach, God love him. He had a huge gut. And when he yelled "hut," you could just see his gut move. It was just, it's guys like that emerge from these shows that I love. So Syracuse has plenty of candidates there. So we'll see who emerges here as ACC All-Access continues over the next couple of weeks. For now, though, Emily, another great day of practice. So we'll give people the schedule this week. We will also be potting on Tuesday. We unfortunately had some technical issues on Monday night with the live pod. That's why I got a recorded version of the pod. So we'll see if we can come back to you live on Tuesday. Stay tuned, especially if you're a Syracuse Sports Insider, and we'll let you know what's going on there. Thursday is practice as well. Tomorrow we will get to talk to offensive players and quarterbacks coach Nunzio Campanelli. Thursday, back to defensive players and defensive backs coach Joe Schaefer. So great, just as we did in the spring. You guys are going to get to hear from all the assistant coaches and trainers and coordinators at the very least once throughout training camp. So that's great, and we appreciate that, of course. So that's what the week looks like here. Stay tuned on syracuse.com. Emily and Chris have been working hard on some great stuff coming your way. I think you guys are really going to enjoy. And our Syracuse Sports Insiders, we have seen a real uptick in subscribers. A lot of you are trying it out, and that's what's great about being a Syracuse Sports Insider. You can try it for weeks, see what we're bringing you, ask us questions. What do you want us to look out for at practice? Ask the coaches and players the insight that you want from us. Just ask by texting 315-847-3895. Try it free for 2 weeks. It's just $3.99 a month after that. This is the prime time to be a Syracuse Sports Insider. Get on board and roll right into the season. So thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders for their great insight, questions, opinions, and comments as well. That's it for now. For Emily Leiker, I'm Brent Axe. We'll be back next time on Syracuse Sports.